we're going to be talking about what is Covidence, how does it work. That's going to be, the bulk of the session going through demo. There's a lot of different places within Covidence, and it's good to sort of know what sort of features it has. Then we're going to just be briefly talking about the documentation that's available, because again, there's a lot and you probably won't remember it all at the end of the session. Setting up an account and, excuse me, some then time for questions at the end. And you don't have to save your questions to the end. If you think of something, you're welcome to put it in chat, and my colleague Abigail Gobin will be paying attention to the chat. And if it's something that could maybe just quickly answer at that time, she might be able to do it in the chat, or she might ask me to sort of address it for the group. Or if it's sort of potentially a little bit more complex, we might save it to the end. Okay, so in terms of what is Covidence, so basically it's sort of a web-based tool that's specifically designed to support the screening, review, and extraction stages of a systematic review or scoping review. And the specifically designed means there are tools, like Excel. Sometimes people use citation management systems and sort of try and, rework them to support a systematic review and scoping review. And they can work to a point, but because they're not specifically designed for it, they don't have all the functionality that might be most helpful. It's a subscription resource. It's something that you can subscribe to as an individual, but we also have an institutional subscription that was first started in 2022 in the spring and was recently renewed. And something that's helpful to know, I think, is that even if we don't renew it, you get anybody who's already started review gets a good amount of time. I think it may be up to a year to actually finish it. So it's not immediately cut off if it's ever not renewed, though of course we hope that it will continue to be so. Just a little bit about my experience. I used Covidence for scoping review throughout the full review process with my colleague, Rosie Haneke. And I've also helped several different teams to import their records into Covidence. And I do some sort of basic instruction about how to use it with both students and faculty members. So some of the things, what it does and what are some of its features. So you could pick different things, but I think these are some of the things that I think are most important. Particularly this first one is it allows for easy tracking of records throughout the screening extraction process. So it's very clear that what work has been done on a particular record, how is it being reviewed, what decisions have been made about it. Because when you have hundreds or thousands of records, that kind of record keeping becomes very complex if you're not in a system that's designed to sort of route things based on your decisions and to record that information. It allows for blinded reviews by multiple reviewers. So if you have two people screening, you don't see the other person's decision, so there's less bias in that way, which can be harder to replicate in sort of more homegrown systems. It flags discrepancy in reviewer decisions. So it's very easy to say like, oh, one person said to include this, one person said no, let's look at these and make a final decision. It allows for easy documentation of numbers for the Prisma charts. And it does have some deduplication capabilities. And because I think sometimes it's easier to think of this a little bit visually, this is just talking through sort of, this is a Prisma chart that you would be creating for your scoping or systematic review. And mostly, the value of it is in these stages. So this screening, so, how many records have you created? How many have you excluded? The retrieval, eligibility, and then, finally, what you're extracting and including at the end. It does have some capabilities for documenting the records that you identified from different databases, but of course you do still need to be actually running your searches and getting the records within those databases. It's after you've completed that stage where it can come into play. Again, can be used for the deduplication with caveats. Some people often do deduplication in EndNote first, and so they move their files into there beforehand. And in that case, if you already did do the deduplication somewhere else, then of course it wouldn't have perfect numbers in Covidence because it only knows about what you've ingested into that system. Is it unique? No, like it's not the only systematic review tool that's out there. There are sort of similar tools with similar functionality, such as Distiller SR, RAND, Abstractor, and others. It is, though, however, the one that we subscribe to at UIC, and it is more fully featured and user-friendly than the free options that I've seen in practice. And also some of them, like RAND, used to be just completely free, and now I think it's, there's a limit how many records that you can process before a fee kicks in. So how does it work? So I'm going to be doing a demonstration. And for this example, I used the scoping review that me and Rosie Haneke had done, which was looking at research literature related to university students who are non-users of their academic library. And I'm just telling you this because that'll guide some of the decisions that we made and the examples that I use. I'm not using the one that we actually finished. I sort of made a duplicate of it to show you through the process. And so what I'm going to be talking about is starting a new review, sort of a big picture, just talking through what it looks like and how it works, setting up review permissions and settings, importing records into your account, screening records, and then data extraction. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate. So this is what Covidence looks like. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. I think it's going to remember me. Otherwise, it would be prompted to go ahead and log in at this point. So just as a quick note, I have the Your Reviews and the UIC as separate because I had started a subscription before the institutional subscription and did 2 reviews as part of that. But if you're starting fresh, you'll probably just see this UIC because it'll all be through the institutional subscription. So if we're going to start a new review, we have the Start a New Review button. Put in some basic information. Are you creating a Cochrane review? You'll know if you are, otherwise you're not. Naming your review type. I talked about just sort of systematic review and scoping review, but technically it does sort of support other review types as well. Asks for area of research, broad topic area, and UIC with the unlimited reviews. And that is a nice thing about the institutional is you can do multiple. You're not restricted in terms of how many you set up, which is great. So for me, I have a demo one, so I'm not going to go ahead and set up a fresh one now. I'm just going to scroll down and open that one up. All right, so big picture. You can just sort of, the thing I really like is you can just easily see all the different steps clearly laid out here and how a record can sort of move through the steps. So you have the import references where you import all of them, and you also see all the duplicates that it flags. You have the title and abstract screening, where you get all this information about how many you still have to do, how many conflicts to resolve, which ones have been said irrelevant. So that's when both reviewers have said no. Anything where you both say yes goes to the full text review. Anything that you both say yes to that goes to the extraction. So it really sort of documents and moves the records through in a very sort of helpful and straightforward way. So I think that's a really big part of the value of this. All right, so we have a lot that I want to talk about in terms of the settings. So when you're first setting up your review, there's a lot that you can do here. So we have the information that was we set up at the beginning when we started our review. You could document your search strategy here, the date of your search strategy. I tend to document that elsewhere, but if you don't have that practice, then this could be a great place to do that, to have it all in one place. You can say how many reviewers, 1 or 2, you want to screen each article. So if two is definitely, best practice. Same, for full text review, and then for data extraction, but you can change it to 1 or 2 if you want. And then it also gives you 2 options for your extraction tool and gives you some information about how they compare, as well as a link if you want to sort of learn more about that. And I didn't make any changes, so I'm not going to bother saving it. Reviewers, you'll see when I open this up, I've invited Rosie Haneke to be a reviewer. I could invite additional reviewers. Your reviewers don't all have to be at UIC. There's no restriction there, just the person who sets it up has to be. So team settings, it gives you option to sort of see who's done what, and also gives you options to say who can do what. So here you can say, see, okay, I've screened 17, Rosie has screened 6, so I'm winning. You can say that everybody can do anything, or you can manage the rules. So you can say, okay, maybe there's one, you know, someone that you want to be involved in screening all of the records. Or perhaps more likely, there might be someone saying, this is the person who should resolve the conflict. So it may be that, for example, the PI maybe doesn't do any of the screening, but that they resolve all of the conflicts. So you can make those decisions about who does what in your team. And similar for the full text review, you can see the progress, who's done what. And again, you can make those decisions about screening and who can resolve the conflicts. And for the extraction, because there shouldn't be any conflicts at this time, it just shows you the progress. So criteria and exclusion reasons. So here you can put in your inclusion criteria and your exclusion criteria. And the value of this is you can choose to show this as you're doing the screening. So if, you know, a reminder. And this can be very helpful, especially if you're, you know, doing screening over a long period of time, you have a break, it's not, you know, fresh in your mind quite what all the criteria were. It can be really nice to do, be able to see that. And I will be showing that as well when I get into the reviewing process. You can also manage exclusion reasons for the full text review. It'll give you some automatic options which you can delete or use. These are the ones that we came up with for our study. So we have some language exclusions, sort of population related exclusions, and exclusions related to the type of study. And this is when you say in the full text review that you want to exclude something, you need to give a reason. So these are the reasons that you'll be picking from, and that will be recorded. And that can also be very helpful if someone makes a different decision than the other person. You can be like, well, why did you want this to be excluded? Oh, okay, this is what you marked. Rather than having to try and go through and be like, well, okay, why did I choose to exclude that? You can also manage the highlights. And what these are they will show up either in red for the exclusion or green for the inclusion. And these are little flags that why something might be, you know, included or might be excluded. So any word that is helpful for you that might be saying like, oh, this is an indicator. It, you know, certainly doesn't make the decision, but it's an indicator that I might want to include it. It relates to the population, it relates to the setting. So here I've university, college, non-user, non-users are sort of words that, you know, I might want to see flagged. And exclusion, public, in this case for public libraries, that's not the setting that we want. And essay, if it's an essay, then it's not of interest because we're focused on the research literature here. And again, you can show, you'll have the option to either see these or hide these as you're doing the review. And then lastly, we have these study tags. And these are ones that you can create so that you can sort of bring back records that for whatever reason is helpful for you in your study. So some of these they create and they don't let you delete, but some of these are ones that we created. So we thought, oh, there are some that we don't want to include, but we want to be able to easily to retrieve them because we will want to talk about them in our literature review. So we made a literature review candidate and we made a tag for that. We also did a flag for no abstract and unclear review together. We sort of reviewed as we went so that we could address sort of if there were sort of gray areas that we needed to think through as a team. And we found that very helpful to sort of flag those in that way and discuss them further. So those are all of the different settings options. So next I'm going to be talking about importing. So importing references up here. So references can be imported using EndNote XML format. So again, if you did your deduplication in EndNote, you might be bringing in your files from there. You can also do it from PubMed format or RIS text format. The RIS text format is common across many different databases except for PubMed. There is a file size limit, which I've sometimes hit against. So sometimes I have had to split a file into separate, smaller record sets and submit multiple files. You can also, though, do it by database, and that's more often you might be under the limit, though even then, in some cases, I've had to split it into smaller files. So when you import it, this is here, you're saying where in what stage you want to import it. So almost always it's going to be at the screening stage. There might be some cases, though, if there is something that you already know that you want to include, you have from an previous thing, then you might be putting it automatically into the included, or citations that seem promising through citation tracing, you might potentially put into full text review. But almost always, especially for all those initial files, you're going to be putting in the screening because you're going to be taking them through the entire process. These other ones are much more unusual. You can also specify the source. You can say, if you're doing it database by database, you can say, okay, these are from Embase, and I want that flagged and tracked that way. So that can be helpful. And then, of course, you just browse and find the file and import. For much larger files, sometimes it takes a while. For small files, it's pretty quick. You can also see your import history. So if you get confused about what you've uploaded or not, especially with those longer files, you can sort of see it here about, okay, how many references were in there, and then it'll also say how many it flagged as duplicates. And all of those duplicates, I'll say they show up here. And so you can go through it. In best practice, you go through each one of them. Pretty sure not everybody does that. But it will say, okay, here's a record. I'm pretty sure these are duplicates with it. And if there's something that you're like, no, that's actually different, you can say not a duplicate. And you can open it up and do that for each record and go through all of them that way. All right, so in terms of screening records, the fun part, so you have all this information here about what's happened so far. You can look at the conflicts here. These are the ones irrelevant where both screeners have said, no, I don't think this should be included. And then here I've got a mere 1,210 to go. So if I click on that, we'll see that, it gives us the metadata about it, the abstract, if the database included it. And I can say no, maybe, or yes. And when I make a decision, it will then disappear. So if I say, nope, it goes away and you go to the next. So it's also like a nice, clean system. This one, I'll just say yes, and it goes away. If I want to see the criteria, I can see it, show criteria, and get information about my inclusion, exclusion. You can keep that always at the top if you want. It'll sort of float at the top. Or you can say, okay, I just wanted to check on that quickly. Now I want to hide it again. Same with the highlights. You can say whether you want to see it, and this flags it as something that may be possibly for exclusion, possibly for inclusion with the green. So it's a nice process, but you also, if some people on your team like it, some people don't, everyone can make their own decisions about what they want to see or not. If you want to add a tag, you select the one that you want to tag, and I could say, okay, I want this as a lit review candidate, and then it'll show up underneath so you can see what tags have been added You can also add a note if you want to, if there's something that you want to remember about this record. You could see the history. It's not going to be very interesting at this time because we've just started the screening process. Or you can also indicate if it's a duplicate. If you've already seen it in the screening process and you know it's a duplicate, you could flag it that way. The deduplication, I think, is pretty good, but it may miss things. So there may be ones that you need to manually flag. And you do also have this quick undo button if you're like, oh, I clicked the wrong button. I think this was a recent addition that people were asking for. It defaults to most relevant. You can change it if you want to. Its ideas about most relevant, and it does use machine learning. After at least 25 have been either included or excluded with at least 2 of each, it begins to say, okay, I think that this is what you're doing. And while you should still be screening all of them either way, their idea is that if you can ideally get more of the ones that you're ultimately going to include at the beginning, then potentially you could have parallel processes if you want to, of also not waiting for all the screening to be done before doing the full text review. You could start with doing the full text review with either the same team or different members, so that you're not having to wait to finish all of the initial title and abstract review screening before moving to the full text, and that you would get more of them earlier. So that's their logic with that. So if we go back, and you'll see that I have 2 less to review now, and these numbers will have updated a little bit. The full text review, if we open that up, we have 2 to screen so far, so 2 that we've both agreed should be looked at further. And here we have the full text associated with them, but that is because we uploaded them. So unfortunately, at the moment, it doesn't have any mechanism to automatically pull full text for you. It is able to ingest sometimes full text from that was pulled in EndNote into here, but that's the only system that I'm aware of so far. So anything that we weren't able to get through that process, we've had to manually do. And even our success rate with EndNote getting the full text is not anywhere near 100%. So here we have include and exclude. And if we choose exclude, then here you pick that reason. So, and you can edit this list if you want to, if you realize there's something that you should have included that you hadn't before. But otherwise you can just pick the one that you want and then move forward, and that will be documented. Yeah, and I think that that's all. Really, that's here, same thing in terms of showing criteria and abstracts here. And the PDF just shows up in another tab. And I hadn't specifically clicked on the resolve conflicts, so I was just going to mention that. This is what it looks like here, is you just need to say, like, what was the agreed final decision. I think it's kind of funny that they have a maybe for the final agreed decision, but those are your options there. Just go through and say, okay, people disagreed. And you can look at the history there and get a little bit of information about potentially why, or potentially who disagreed. All right, so at the moment we don't have anything in the extraction, but I want to talk a little bit about what that would look like. So here we have a data extraction template and a quality assessment template. So the data extraction template is where you can create or customize a template for how you're going to extract information from your article. So here on the right, this is what it will look like It's a preview of what it'll actually look like. And here's where you can do the editing. So you can start from scratch, or you can sort of modify the options that they have given you here. So for any one of them, you can click on it. If you say, no, I actually don't want the study ID, or no, I don't want the title, you could delete it. Or if there's something that you wanted to add, you can click any one of these pluses. You can say as what kind of item do you want to add. So maybe we can just say, okay, I want a text field that I'm going to say publication date. And as you do it, you'll see it added on that side. So it gives you a nice quick view of what it's going to look like. You can also edit it. So here it has country in which the study is conducted. If you wanted to add an option, we can just do enter, and I'll put in Japan, and we'll see that it's added in the button. So it's pretty nice, sort of that basic logic. You can also add information, instructions to instructors if you feel like maybe a field isn't going to be, doesn't stand out on its own clearly. You can give some information about how to use it. So it's a pretty nice system. And then once you actually have things in the extraction, records in that extraction field, you're going to see the full text that you've added, and then you'll on the left and on the right, you're going to see this extraction thing, and you can just move information between those or sort of type it in as you're looking at it. So it tends to work pretty well. And of course, publish it once you're happy with it, or you can save it as a draft if you're sort of continuing to work on it. And then for the other template, I must admit that I haven't used it in practice myself, but there is this quality assessment template, and it works very similarly in terms of having this preview version on the side, and then having options here that you can either delete or you can add new items. So if that's of interest, you can certainly use that as well. Great. So there is also, if you're looking for a particular study, there is also this option up here to do a search to find that, if there's a particular one that you want to look at. Oh, and then at the end, there is this Prisma chart that it generates. And again, if there's anything that's happened before that impacts the numbers, you'll want to pay attention to that. So if you, did duplication and EndNote, you'll want to manually edit it, but you can do that. You can download the docs file and edit however you want to, and it keeps track of all of the sort of numbers and what happened and why, which can be really useful. So it really sort of helps with that process. All right. So back to the slides. So caveats. Once you start reviewing, so once you start making decisions, you cannot undo an import. So it's just always good to make sure that you've imported what you wanted to import before you start going. Because we have an unlimited reviews, you could start fresh if you recognize it early, but you can't. It's a good thing in terms of you can't accidentally delete records, but it's a bad thing in terms of you also can't intentionally delete records if you find that you need to. The search capability in terms of finding those individual records, it's a little quirky. It doesn't always work as expected in terms of bringing up the most relevant one up top. I and my colleagues have found that. And again, the no automated finding of full text. Some of this may change. They are continuously updating it. I think that's a feature that a lot of people would love. So it may change, but not yet. So in terms of documentation available, we have a lot of information on our research guide. And then Covidence also has great support. So we have this here, and my colleague is going to put these in the chat as well. Just a lot of information about what is Covidence, how does it work, and links. And these are pretty much all links to their own materials. So maybe we'll add this webinar. And then Covidence also has a great page, lots of detailed information articles. If there's something sort of more specific that you're interested in, that's a great resource as well. So in terms of setting up account, you do have to use your UIC email address to sign up for the account so that you have access to the institutional subscription. And we're going to be putting in a sign up link in the chat, and ask just for very basic information. I think your name and your email address. If you run into any problems with getting an email invitation, you could reach out to Covidence, or you could reach out to us, and then we'll reach out to Covidence. We have found, I think, a couple of people at the beginning who are having problems getting accounts set up, but I think that's mostly resolved by now. So wanted to check now if there's any questions.